They called her just the water girl, until a Navy SEAL phantom put him on the ground. They called me useless out there on the grinder. Not quietly, not as a joke passed between friends. He said it loud, clear, and slow, like he wanted the word to echo off the concrete and stick to me. I was standing still, holding a plastic water tray against my ribs, heat rising off the ground in waves. Late morning sun, salt in the air, my collar damp with sweat, my hands steady. His voice wasn't. He stepped closer than he had any right to, close enough that I could smell the sharp sweetness of an energy drink on his breath. Close enough that I felt every eye turn toward us, then drift away just as fast. 50 people nearby, plenty of witnesses, not a single voice. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain myself. I didn't look at his rank patch or the men behind him, smiling like this was entertainment. I didn't move at all. I waited. That calm got under his skin. I could see it in the way his shoulders tightened, the way his hand lifted like the space between us belonged to him, like he'd already decided how this would end. I remember thinking how strange it is that people still confuse silence with weakness. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I was officially dead by then. That was what the paperwork said. That I went down overseas in the spring of 2013. Wrong blast site, wrong coordinates, wrong body tagged with my name and sent through a chain that never questioned it. That kind of error only happens in units that are not supposed to exist, operating out of places that never show up on a map. Sometimes the mistake is an accident. Sometimes it is a convenience. Sometimes it becomes the mission itself. By the time I was standing on the grinder with a water tray in my hands, the Navy believed I was a closed chapter. No follow-ups. No memorial past the quiet ones. No questions asked too loudly. Being declared dead has a strange weight to it. You stop belonging to the future, and you are free from the past in ways that scare people who still have something to lose. On paper, I was Megan Calloway, temporary civilian support staff, short-term assignment, no rank, no authority, just another name on a clipboard at a small naval training annex outside Point Loma Station in California. Not the city people imagine when they hear San Diego. No postcard views, no ceremony, just concrete, salt air, and long days that start early and end late. That location was chosen because nobody important trained there, and nobody looked too closely at the people who kept it running. By commission, I am a Navy officer. By experience, most of my career was spent without insignia, without introductions, without anyone needing to know who I was. I learned early that visibility is not power. Control is. My call sign was Phantom, not because I vanished, but because I understood the advantage of being overlooked. When people stop paying attention, they tell you everything without realizing it. I was not there by accident. I was there for one man. His name was Evan Brooks, my former second in command. A calm presence when things went bad. The kind of leader who never raised his voice and never wasted a word. He was declared killed during a classified maritime operation years earlier, somewhere off the Horn of Africa. Same report that took my name with his. Same sealed file. Same quiet ending, except I knew better. Bits of information started surfacing months before the grinder incident. Incomplete, fragmented, contractor movement logs that did not line up, medical supply requests routed through civilian channels that made no sense, a voice on a secure line that cut off too fast but sounded too familiar. I had reason to believe Evan was alive, injured, and being moved inside the country under the protection of private security contracts. No charges, no oversight, no intention of letting him reappear. That kind of disappearance does not happen by accident. The water detail put me close to the right people without raising suspicion. Contractors talk freely when they think nobody important is listening. Trainees do not notice the staff who refill bottles and clear trash. Nobody interrogates the help. That invisibility was the access point. The man who confronted me that day was Ryan Hensley, former Army, now private security, big frame, loud laugh, the kind of confidence built on never being challenged in public. He took up space like it was his right and mistook attention for authority. Men like him learn quickly who they can push and who they cannot. They test boundaries for sport. He liked being seen. Around us were trainees fresh into the pipeline, contractors rotating through short-term work, and a few visiting family members watching from a distance. 50 or so people moving in and out of their own concerns. To them, it looked like nothing. A contractor mouthing off to support staff. Background noise on a long training day. But there was one man who did not look away. Master Chief Walter Keene had been in naval special warfare longer than most people there had been alive. He did not stare, he did not intervene, he simply observed. Men like him do not react to volume. They notice posture, balance, stillness. He saw things in that moment others missed. That encounter on the grinder was not random. It was pressure pressing against what it thought was a weak seam. Ego testing silence, assumption testing restraint. And pressure, applied long enough, always reveals character. The signs were there long before he ever put his hands on me. Ryan Hensley had been working the edges of the grinder all morning, drifting in loose circles like he was bored and looking for something to poke. His voice carried farther than it needed to. Jokes that were not funny. Comments meant to pull attention back to him. He leaned into conversations that were not his, stood too close to people who did not invite it, treated shared space like it belonged to him. His men followed half a step behind, always half a beat late with their laughter, watching faces instead of listening to instructions. That kind of energy spreads if nobody checks it. It gets louder, sharper, meaner. I kept my movements small, not stiff, not hesitant, controlled. Feet placed where they needed to be. Weight balanced forward, shoulders loose enough to move, but not enough to invite contact. The body remembers these things even when the mind stays quiet. You do not forget how to stand ready, you just decide when to show it. I could feel Hensley clocking me every time he passed, measuring, dismissing, measuring, again. To him, I was a shape that did not fit where he thought power lived. Master Chief Keene noticed too, though for different reasons. I caught it in the way his gaze paused just a second longer than necessary, the way his eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion but recognition. He shifted his weight once, like he was recalculating something. Men who have trained others for decades rid posture the way medics rid pulse. They notice what is too controlled to be accidental. Hensley noticed none of that. He commented on my height first, then my voice when I answered someone else nearby, then the water tray in my hands. Each remark was casual on the surface, tossed out like nothing, but they were designed to pull something out of me. Anger, embarrassment, defense, anything that would confirm the story he had already written in his head. I gave him nothing. I did not look at him. I did not change my pace. I did not explain. Silence is uncomfortable for people who rely on noise. It gives them nowhere to land. That confused him. You can see the moment confusion turns into entitlement. It shows up in the shoulders first, the chest, the assumption that if something does not push back, it must be afraid. People who expect resistance and meet calm instead often mistake it for weakness. They assume submission. They assume the next step is theirs to take. That is when situations turn dangerous. I remember thinking about Evan then, even as Hensley kept talking, about the last time I had seen him overseas, standing in a doorway with his helmet off, dust on his sleeves, smiling like nothing in the world could reach him. He had always looked like that right before things went bad, calm, certain, quiet confidence that did not need witnesses. We had made promises that day, not dramatic ones, just the kind you say under your breath when you know the job is not done yet. Promises that do not age well with time. Hensley stepped closer, close enough that his shadow cut across the concrete in front of me. Close, enough that I could hear his breathing under the noise around us. His tone shifted. The jokes got sharper, more personal. He wanted a reaction now, wanted to win something he could not name. Around us, people kept pretending not to see. Trainees focused on the ground. Contractors suddenly busy with their phones. It is easier to look away than to decide who is right when you think the answer does not involve you. I did not blame them. I understood the instinct. The grinder has a way of amplifying silence. The sound of boots fades. Voices drop. It is not sudden. It is gradual, like the air tightening. Conversations die off one by one until you can hear things you should not be able to hear. Fabric shifting. A tray creaking slightly under grip. Breathing. I felt the moment before it happened. The slight change in his posture. The decision settling in. He had convinced himself that I would fold if he pushed hard enough, that the rules did not apply because nobody important was watching. He was wrong about both. Master Chief Keen had gone very still, not alarmed, not tense, just present, ready to act if he needed to, though I do not think he believed he would. I adjusted my stance without looking down, a fraction of an inch, muscle memory, not thought. The body preparing before the mind allows it. The grinder went quiet in that way places do right before something breaks. Not loud, not dramatic, just a pause. And in that pause, everything that mattered was already decided. The line was crossed with a hand, not a punch, not a strike, just fingers closing around the fabric near my collar, a casual tug meant to remind me who he thought was in control. The kind of contact men dismiss as nothing. The kind that is never nothing. It was brief, public, calculated. He expected me to flinch. I didn't. I looked up at him then, just once. Met his eyes, without heat, without fear. Calm has weight when it is real. I told him to step back. My voice stayed low, clear, not a warning dressed as a threat, just a statement of fact. That was the moment he made his choice. He shoved me, not hard enough to hurt, hard enough to humiliate. He expected the tray to tip, the bottles to scatter, my feet to tangle. He expected a scene that would end with laughter and someone else cleaning up the mess. Instead, I shifted my weight and redirected his force before the thought finished forming. Muscle memory does not ask permission. It does not debate consequences. His momentum moved where it was already going. He lost balance just a step, nothing dramatic, but it was enough. Confusion flickered across his face. People noticed, not all at once, not loudly, but heads turned, conversations paused. Someone coughed and stopped. The grinder does not miss small changes when they happen in the open. Hensley felt it slipping and did what men like him always do when control wavers. He escalated. He reached for an unloaded rifle resting on a nearby display table. It was there for show, safe, harmless in his mind. He shoved it toward me with a grin that was meant to invite laughter back into the moment. Told me to show them how to hold it, to play along, to prove his point. I took the weapon. The safety check was automatic. Fingers moved where they were supposed to without thought. Grip settled clean and firm. Elbows set, stock aligned. Everything precise, everything correct. Not exaggerated, not fast, just right. Then I placed it back on the table. No explanation, no flourish, no need to prove anything. Silence followed. It was the kind of silence that does not come from shock, but from recognition. A few people understood instantly, others felt it without knowing why. You could hear boots on concrete again, breathing, the distant sound of someone calling cadence far away. As I lowered my arms, the sleeve of my shirt rode up. Shrapnel scars do not fade the way people expect them to. They are not neat. They do not blend in. They cut across the skin in irregular patterns that tell a story without words. Anyone who has seen them knows what they mean. Anyone who has earned them never forgets the look. One of the contractors, Luke Merritt, went pale. He did not say a word. He did not need to. His eyes fixed on my forearm, then lifted to my face, and something unspoken passed through him. Recognition, respect, maybe regret. He knew. Hensley did not. All he knew was that the air around him had changed, that the laughter he expected never came back, that the crowd was no longer on his side in ways he could not name. He felt the shift but could not understand it, and that made him angry. Anger filled the space where control used to be. Master Chief Keen had stepped closer without anyone noticing, not rushing, not interfering, just present now, his expression unreadable, his posture relaxed in a way that only comes from certainty. Hensley laughed once, sharp and forced, trying to drag the moment back under his control. He said something about me being lucky, about me getting away with it. Words meant to reset the balance. They did not. The grinder does not care about volume. It responds to truth. And the truth had already surfaced in small, undeniable ways. In posture, in scars, in the way a weapon was handled and set down without ceremony. Hensley was standing in the middle of it, still convinced he was in charge. He had no idea how close he was to the end of his advantage, and he was about to cross the line again, not knowing that the next step would cost him everything he thought he had. He could have walked away. That is the part people forget. Pride always offers an exit before it demands payment. There is always a moment when the door is still open, when dignity can be salvaged if a person is willing to let go of being right in front of witnesses. He stood there breathing hard, jaw tight, eyes moving from the faces around us and back to mine. The room had shifted, and he felt it. He knew something had changed, even if he did not understand what. That was his chance. He did not take it. He stepped back in and grabbed me again, harder this time, fingers digging into fabric, no pretense left, no humor. He needed to win something, anything, to prove the moment still belonged to him. It was public, deliberate, a decision made in front of too many people to pretend it was an accident. I ended it in under a second. There was no anger in it, no performance, no excess. A controlled movement that redirected his center of gravity, locked his shoulder at the point where strength turns into leverage, and put him face down on the concrete with his breath forced out of him. He did not hit hard. He did not need to. The impact was clean, final. His options were gone before he understood he had lost them. The grinder went dead quiet. My cover tore as I moved. Fabric ripped where it had already been strained. I felt it before I saw it. The edge of a patch, exposed where it should not have been. The trident caught the light for half a second longer than it should have. That was enough. Master Chief Keen was already in motion, not rushing, not panicked. He did not ask questions because he did not need answers in that moment. He secured the scene, ordered everyone back, and took control with the authority of someone who had earned it a long time ago. When he looked at me, his hand came up in a salute that was not for show. It was precise, quiet, meant for someone he recognized even if the records said otherwise. Others followed without being told, some out of instinct, some out of understanding they did not yet have words for. Hensley lay still, breathing shallow, the fight drained out of him. Medics were called, procedures kicked in. The day resumed in pieces around the break, but nothing was the same. Later, behind a closed door, I told the truth. Not all of it. Not the parts that did not belong to him, but enough. I told him about Evan, about the operation that never made it into briefings, about the casualty report that closed too cleanly, about transfer routes hidden inside contractor logistics, and medical requests that did not match their stated purpose, about Americans holding one of their own in limbo because admitting a mistake would have cost more than silence. I told him why I had been standing on the grinder with a water tray instead of sitting behind a desk where my name belonged. Keene did not interrupt. He did not react. He listened the way men do when they understand the weight of what they are being handed. When I finished, he sat still for a long moment, eyes fixed on a point just past my shoulder, working through implications that would ripple farther than either of us could see. Then he nodded once. He made calls that did not show up on logs. Calls to people who still remembered how things were supposed to work. People who understood that loyalty does not expire because paperwork says it should. His voice stayed even, professional, unemotional. That is how real decisions are made. When he finished, he looked at me again and said nothing. I made my own calls after that, names I had not used in years, numbers that were never stored anywhere permanent, voices answered that were supposed to be gone, some surprised, some not. None of them asked me why, they asked when, because once you cross certain lines together, time does not erase the obligation. Standing there, the adrenaline finally fading, I felt the weight of what had started, not the fight, that was over, but the consequence of stepping out of the shadows. I had stopped pretending to be invisible, and that choice meant there was no going back. The response was not fast. It never is when ghosts start speaking again. Systems built to forget do not move quickly when memory knocks on the door. I sent the messages anyway, short, clean, no explanations, no emotion, just identifiers that meant nothing to anyone outside a very small circle. Then I waited. Replies came back slowly, hours apart, different time zones, different lives interrupted. Voices I had not heard in years answered lines that were not supposed to exist anymore. Men and women officially listed as deceased, retired, lost, reassigned into nothing. People erased by necessity, by convenience, by decisions made above pay grades that never touched consequences directly. Nobody asked me for proof. They knew my voice. That recognition hit harder than anything that happened on the grinder. It reminded me how thin the line is between being remembered and being gone, how fragile the stories we tell ourselves about closure really are. The waiting did strange things to my nerves. I was not afraid of failing. I had lived with failure before. I was afraid of being right, afraid that all the pieces I had been quietly collecting would finally lock together into something ugly and undeniable. By nightfall, confirmation came through channels that were never meant to carry truth. Evan was alive, injured but stable, moved between domestic facilities under contractor oversight. No charges, no court records, no official detention status, just a name stripped of context and buried under layers of plausible deniability. A human being turned into a liability that nobody wanted to claim. That kind of silence weighs more than gunfire ever did. Gunfire ends. Silence stretches. It follows you into rooms where nobody knows your history. It settles into the spaces where answers should live and leaves you carrying questions instead. I had seen men break under fire and stand steady afterward. I had also seen what unanswered waiting does to people. It hollows them out slowly. Orders, when they came, were not written down. They never are when the truth does not fit neatly into policy. Coordination happened through trust instead of channels, through favors owed and reputations earned, long before any of this. No one talked about heroics. No one mentioned recognition. There would be no headlines, no commendations, just people quietly deciding that loyalty does not end when forms are filed and boxes are checked. Everyone understood the risk. Everyone accepted it anyway. I sat alone after the calls ended, the building quiet around me, lights humming softly overhead. My hands were steady. They always are when it matters. My chest felt tight in a way I could not stretch out. That was new. Or maybe I had just been ignoring it for a long time. I thought about how close I had come to staying invisible. If Hensley had walked away, if I had swallowed the moment and let it pass, if I had kept my head down and finished the assignment exactly as planned, Evan would still be where he was, lost in a system designed to hide its own mistakes, and I would have gone on carrying that knowledge alone. There are moments that do not allow that kind of safety. I thought about all the times silence had kept me alive, about how useful it had been to let people underestimate me, to move through spaces without leaving a wake. That skill had saved lives. It had saved mine. But silence has a cost when it becomes habit. When you start believing that staying unseen is the same thing as staying right. Outside, training resumed like nothing had happened. Boots on concrete, commands carried on the air. The base did not pause for personal reckoning. It never does. The machine keeps moving whether you are ready or not. I stood up and walked back out into it, aware now that I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. People would look differently. Questions would come later. Consequences, too. I accepted that. It was part of the choice. The work ahead would be careful, slow, quiet in ways that mattered. There would be no rushing this. No room for error. Lives were tied to the margins now, and margins do not forgive sloppiness. As I stepped back into the noise, I felt something settle that had been loose for a long time. Not relief. Resolve. Some fights announce themselves with chaos and sound. Others begin the moment you decide that being invisible is no longer an option. We reached him 3 weeks later, not fast, not dramatic. 3 weeks of careful movement, quiet coordination, and waiting for the right doors to open in the right order. No helicopters, no lights, no weapons raised, just paperwork that suddenly worked the way it was always supposed to, and people stepping aside without asking questions they did not want answered. The facility looked ordinary. That was the most unsettling part. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, a place designed to feel temporary without ever letting anyone leave. The kind of place you could pass 100 times without noticing if you did not know what it held. There were no shots fired, no shouted commands, no speeches about duty or sacrifice, just doors unlocking that should never have been closed in the first place. Evan was sitting on the edge of a narrow bed when I saw him. He looked older, not from age, from waiting, thinner than I remembered. His hair cut short by someone who did not know him, his posture careful, like he had learned not to move unless invited. But he was breathing. He was standing when he saw me. He was alive. That changed everything. For a second, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, both of us recalibrating reality. He searched my face like he was making sure I was real, like he expected me to vanish if he blinked. Then his shoulders dropped. He tried to say my name and failed. His voice broke in a way I had never heard before. He covered his face with his hands and cried, quiet and uncontrolled, like someone who had been holding it together for too long, without permission to fall apart. I did not cry. Someone had to stay steady. I put a hand on his shoulder and waited until his breathing slowed. I told him where he was going, what would happen next, what would not be said out loud. I spoke the way you do when you are bringing someone back from the edge, one fact at a time. No promises I could not keep, no reassurance that was not earned. He nodded, listened, trusted. Trust is a fragile thing when it has been broken by your own people. The extraction was quiet, a change of clothes, a signed release that pretended this was routine, a ride that did not stop until the road opened up and the air felt different. No cameras, no record that would raise questions later. The fallout came after, it always does. Careers shifted without announcements. Contracts were terminated for reasons that did not make sense to anyone outside a very narrow circle. People were reassigned, retired early, moved out of sight. There were no hearings, no press releases, just quiet accountability handled the way institutions prefer. When the truth does not fit a clean narrative, it did not feel like justice, it felt like containment. Ryan Hensley lost his position. That was noted in a report I never read. I heard it secondhand weeks later. He had crossed lines too publicly, too recklessly. He had become a liability. That mattered less to me than the fact that he finally understood something he should have known long before. Power misused always circles back. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it waits until you are standing in front of people you think do not matter. It rarely announces itself when it returns. It just removes the ground from under your feet and lets you realize how long you were standing on borrowed authority. Evan spent the next few days sleeping more than he talked. When he did speak, it was careful, measured. He asked what he was allowed to remember, what he was supposed to forget. Questions nobody should have to ask about their own life. I told him the truth. Some things would never be acknowledged. Some parts of his story would stay classified. But he was not alone anymore. He was not forgotten. And he was not going back to that room. That mattered. When I finally left him with people he could trust, I stood outside for a long time without moving. The job was done, the outcome achieved, but the weight of it did not lift the way people expect when a mission succeeds. Victory, when it comes this way, is quiet. It does not feel like triumph. It feels like correction, a wrong set slightly straighter than it was before. And as I walked away, I understood something I had not fully grasped until then. The moment on the grinder was never about me. It was about who decides what a person is worth when nobody is watching. And this time, we had decided differently. I stayed on base for another month after Evan was moved somewhere safe. Nothing official marked the change, but the air around me shifted. People treated me differently without ever saying why. Some avoided eye contact entirely, like looking too closely might pull them into something they did not want to understand. Others nodded when they passed me, a brief dip of the chin that carried more weight than conversation ever could. Respect can feel heavy when it arrives late and without context. I went back to the water detail, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. It gave me space to think, to move without being watched too closely, to exist in the margins where I had always been most comfortable. Carrying trays, refilling coolers, walking the same routes day after day, felt grounding after weeks of careful tension. Simple work has a way of settling the mind when nothing else will. Being underestimated had saved me more times than I could count. It let me listen when others talked too freely. It kept me alive when attention would have drawn fire. It allowed me to move through rooms without resistance, to learn things I was never meant to know. In my career, invisibility was not a weakness. It was a skill sharpened over years. But standing on that grinder, holding a water tray, while someone decided I was nothing, I realized how thin the line can be between restraint and erasure. Underestimation protects you until it does not. If I had stayed quiet that day, if I had let the moment pass the way so many moments do, Evan would still be a ghost, a problem buried under contractor paperwork and polite silence, and I would have carried that knowledge alone, telling myself that patience was discipline and silence was strength. Women in uniform learn early when to stay quiet. We learn which battles cost more than they are worth. We learn how to read rooms before we speak. We learn that reacting too fast can brand you difficult, emotional, unprofessional. We learn how to carry weight without showing strain, how to let disrespect slide because correcting it feels like another job on top of the one we are already doing. Those lessons keep you employed. Sometimes they keep you alive. But there is another lesson that takes longer to learn. Silence can turn into permission. Permission for someone to keep pushing. Permission for systems to keep hiding their mistakes. Permission for people with borrowed authority to decide who matters and who does not. That shift happens quietly. There is no alarm that goes off when restraint stops being noble and starts being convenient for everyone else. That line is not always clear, but it is real. I saw it more clearly in the weeks that followed, in the way conversations stopped when I walked into certain rooms, in the way others suddenly wanted my opinion on things they had never asked me about before. Nothing had changed about my capability, only their awareness had. That unsettled me more than the confrontation ever did. One afternoon, I ran into Master Chief Keen near the edge of the training grounds. We exchanged a few words about nothing important: weather, schedules, routine. Then he paused and said, quietly, that the place runs smoother when people remember who they are accountable to. He did not say my name. He did not need to. Evan checked in once during that month. Short messages, simple updates. He was sleeping better, eating more, learning how to exist outside locked doors again, healing in ways that had nothing to do with medicine. I did not ask for details. Some recovery deserves privacy. Knowing he was alive was enough. On my last week, I stood on the grinder again early one morning. No crowd, no noise, just concrete cooling from the night air and the distant sound of training starting up. I thought about how that space had seen so many beginnings and endings, often without anyone realizing which was which. I thought about the version of myself who had stood there weeks earlier, underestimated and unseen, carrying more than anyone guessed. I did not regret the silence I had practiced for years. It had shaped me, protected me, taught me discipline, but I no longer believed silence was always the right answer. Strength is not loud, that much is true, but neither is it obligated to stay hidden forever. As I walked away, water tray balanced against my side, I understood something that will stay with me longer than the memory of any mission. Being quiet is a choice. Being invisible is sometimes a strategy. But knowing when to step forward when silence stops serving and starts enabling is its own form of courage. And that courage does not announce itself. It simply decides, once and for all, that some lines are not meant to be crossed quietly. I still think about that moment on the grinder, not because of what happened, but because of what it revealed. How strength changes shape depending on who is watching. How discipline, when it is quiet, gets mistaken for fear. How often capable women carry an extra weight, not in their packs, but in the constant testing of whether they belong in the space they already earned. I did not win anything that day. There was no victory in putting someone on the ground, no satisfaction in being recognized only after things went too far. What changed was simpler than that. I stopped pretending to be small for the comfort of people who mistook silence for permission. Evan is home now, alive, healing in ways that take time and patience and privacy. He wakes up without locked doors. He breathes without counting steps. That is enough. That was always the point. If there is a lesson here, it is not about fighting back. It is about restraint and the discipline to know when restraint is still serving its purpose and when it has quietly turned into something else. It is about knowing yourself well enough to wait when waiting is right, and to act when waiting becomes a form of surrender. Some warriors never raise their voices. They never posture. They never explain themselves to people who are not listening anyway. They simply decide when the moment arrives. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.